Hello and welcome. This is episode 15 of a podcast Engineer-to-Manager. I'm your host, Oleg Maestrenko. In this podcast, I invite experienced engineering managers from different parts of the world. We explore what engineering management is, what are their challenges, and what are their opportunities of this position. Today's guest is Phil Calçado. Hello, Phil. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for asking and thanks for joining the show. Happy to have you here.
Super excited to be joining.
Yeah, so Phil, I looked in your website when I was preparing for this recording, and you have like 20 plus years of experience within different companies, from very tech companies like DigitalOcean, building their infrastructure, to very business oriented like SoundCloud or WeWork. So very different domains with a number of presence on the conferences where you discussed and you shared your experience with microservices, with really like hard tech stuff. So really excited to have you here. Is anything else that you would like to add about your position, career?
Oh, no, yeah, I think you summarized it well. Like I spent 10 years in more kind of traditional roles, like the 2000s. And then I jumped for the startup land back when I was living in Berlin with SoundCloud. Being there since then, bigger and smaller companies. And more recently, last year, I actually decided to take the leap and found my own startup. So my co-founder and it's been very, very wild. Also, not the best year in the history of mankind to found a startup, which adds more fun. But it's been a wild ride.
But look, there is no good time to found a startup. You just fill it, you understand there is a market, and you just go with it, right?
That's right.
Yeah. We will talk here and we will cover it for sure in the second part of the conversation. But dear listeners, before you scroll to that interesting part, put this on the pause, go subscribe and like. And please let us know whether you know from the Phil Calçado from which country he is. I think you can guess it, but just try in the comments. So Phil, you went from the consultant role, right? So you started, as you said, as a consultant, and then you went to engineering management at one point in time. How did you make that switch? I do realize it was quite some ago, and this is a different mindset when you go from the consulting to internal position, right? So how did you make the switch, and why did you make the switch?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, my first job wasn't consulting, because I'm old enough that 2002 I think was my first formal job, and I was working in product back in my home country that I won't reveal at the moment, so that I don't spoil the game we're playing with listeners. But I was working on basically video over the internet in 2002. That's like before YouTube was acquired by Google. It's kind of completely different scenario from what we have today. And then I moved to consulting specifically to join ThoughtWorks. So for those who don't know the company, ThoughtWorks was like a big name in the agile/modern architecture movement back in the 2000s. They're still there. They're still like a great. I've hired them many times after I left the company. I'm very, very proud of having spent 5 years with them. And I moved to Australia. I lived in Europe for a while with them, working on all kind of different projects. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to go back to working on product, which was the biggest driver for me to make the leap. And I also wanted to move to Berlin in Germany. So I was living in London back in the day. And I literally went on berlinstartupjobs.com. I looked at any company that would be hiring people, took a sick day, flew to Berlin from London, did like 5 interviews in a day, and ended up signing up with SoundCloud. Back then, SoundCloud was probably 40 people. I think the engineering team was 8 people. And I joined as a backend engineer, and which was good for me because during my time at ThoughtWorks, I was writing code and, doing normal engineering tasks, but more and more the value of what I was doing was in project management. So between being tech lead for projects and managing big kind of initiatives inside companies, I wanted to get back to just like sitting down and working on a product. And that's when I moved to Berlin, joined SoundCloud. The team was 8 people, so there was no manager. We had a VP of engineering that was the I guess, the CTO equivalent back then. But quickly, we were growing so much that we had to start assigning kind of management/leadership roles. I was one of the obvious choices because I probably was more experienced than most people in the team. And I ended up managing what we call the app team that worked on everything application related at SoundCloud. Eventually, the app team became the product engineering organization with like north of 250 people over 5 years that we built there. And that's basically kind of how, in a very startup vibe, like how I made my transition. It's more like, okay, the company's growing. Somebody needs to take this role. You have this experience, jump into that.
Nice. So you basically joined their company when it just started. So you had this opportunity to see it grow, right? And this is a very interesting period of any company, because when you kind of go to established, then you have to learn the rules. And here you had an opportunity to take your experience from your past and kind of try to implement the processes and shape the company together with your team.
Yeah, it was. I mean, SoundCloud was founded maybe 2008, so it was maybe 3 years old. But that was the hyper growth phase. That was when we were hiring tens of people every month. We grew users from 7 million to 300 million in like 5 years. It was insane, like best professional time of my life. But something that was interesting in this transition was that I went to a smaller company so that I could get back to working on a product with my hands, typing code, being part of that. But because I had spent basically 10 years, a little short of 10 years, working on organizing teams, like building teams and building delivery machines, at some point I was like, okay, this is crazy. We cannot be doing things like this. It's like we need some kind of process. We need to know what everybody else is doing. We're not just 6 people in a room anymore. So which kind of aligned well with where the company was going. And it's been a theme in my career recently where I joined companies that are going to like some kind of hypergrowth and use my experience in large organizations in more like consulting side to kind of find the right processes for that particular organization. Obviously, it's a startup. It's not Bank of America, which is a place I've worked as a consultant. You need to find what works well, what doesn't work. But I would say that there's always some process. Maybe it's explicit, maybe it's not explicit. But the role of the leader in in kind of building and taking care of the delivery machine, I think is very important. It was kind of what made me a good fit for that role back then.
You mentioned the word hyper. So basically, what changes when you say from the company that grows to the hyper grows? Because there might be some changes in their setting the processes, managing the team. What is the difference in your experience that you had and hyper growth or a company?
I think that it's interesting. I guess you could say there's 2 ends of hyper growth, maybe more. One is on the kind of the product side, so the number of users, number of money flowing, whatever measurement you have for success, and the other one is just the size of the organization. Sometimes those things are correlated. I would say that in the last 5 years, they've always been correlated. You get a lot of users, a lot of money, you hire a lot of people. That was not the case in like the 2010s, 2011, 2015, because you couldn't even find the people to hire. People were expensive. Companies didn't have that much money. And it's not the case now where, the market has changed. And just because you have a lot of users doesn't mean that you're going to get money and hire a lot of people. So we had like this maybe 5 years of kind of crazy growth on both ends. But in SoundCloud's case, what we had was our user base was growing like crazy. We had gotten money, and we knew that we had to deliver really quickly because SoundCloud was competing against Spotify, Google Music, Apple Music, all these kind of different platforms. And one way to do that is by hiring more people. Ultimately, because we're a consumer brand, so we hire more people in the marketing team, we hire more people in the support team, and in engineering as well. So the thing that I think is interesting in hyper growth, whatever that might mean to somebody versus organic growth, is that you don't really have a lot of time to establish a process and iterate it a few times. Things change overnight. Like one day I woke up and I had 40 direct reports. It's like, okay, I need to do something about this. So I started introducing a layer of management. And then that's great. Okay, I just basically split kind of teams around that. It was a flat team. Like we split into small different teams. And at some point, those teams grow a little more. They work in a very uncohesive way. It's like nobody knows which team is supposed to own anything. So you start thinking about, okay, I need to organize it somehow in different silos. It's just like as you go, you don't have time to think a lot about what you're doing. And one thing that I gave a talk about this at the Lead Dev conference a few years ago, that one thing that's really annoying and sad about being a manager is that as opposed to an engineer, you cannot try things at home, right? If an engineer and you want to play with the library, you can do that on your own time, or you can do that at work in a kind of a lab environment. As a leader, you need to make a decision and go for it. So knowing what kind of decision you can backtrack from and you can change later, what kind of decision is more important, and you probably should think more about it, especially when impacting people, not just projects and money. It's being super interesting. So I'd say that the main difference on the kind of a hyper growth stage is this velocity that things happen. You need to do something about this right now, but just know that whatever decision you make right now is not going to be correct in 2 weeks, 2 months time. Things will always be changing because every time you add 10 new people to a team, things will, just the process will change. And some people try to do this the other way around. They're just like, okay, I'm going to build a machine like Google or Facebook that's like absorbs up to 10,000 people. And they have all the problems of paying that cost up front. And, there's different situations there. But my philosophy around this has always been to try to understand what, people from Amazon kind of type 1, type 2 decisions, I guess. Like what are the decisions that don't really matter, that you can change them later. What are the decisions that are more important, and kind of always know that you need to be balanced in between these two.
Yeah. You mentioned that basically their team grows and you add people and you have like sometimes unorganized direction. And as a manager, how do you make sure that at one point in time, new people who onboard it understand where we are going? Because, right, so you can establish a process, you can establish a procedure, but once you get additional 10 people tomorrow, have to make sure they are becoming a part of the team first, and second, have to make sure that they are going in the same direction as the whole team. Because this is a manager's job, right, to align people and understand that they are feel connected and they understand what is their part of the process, right? So you just cannot put the person and say like, okay, you are doing the task this or that, because this is not sustainable in the long run, right? You're basically splitting the task, but you want to make sure the team is well connected and understands where we go. And in the hyper growth, this is an additional challenge. So how do you bound people in the team within the hypergrow phase?
Yeah, I think I've seen things that work better than others in this way. And it's kind of a cop-out solution, but thinking about culture is really important. But I'm not just going to say think about culture. Everybody says that. What does that even mean? But there are practical things that I think are important in a company that's going through something like this. One of them is that I really believe that you need to think about how when people join the company, when people are in the company, and we're talking specifically about engineers, but that applies to other roles as well. Who do they identify with? Do they think that I am an engineer on the authentication team, or I'm an engineer for company X or department Y? I'm an engineer on the release manager. What kind of identity they build? And if you start thinking about this, there's a lot of interesting things you can do from onboarding, how these people get onboarded. I really like the spirit, not necessarily the implementation of what Facebook does in terms of onboarding people in a single, in like a batch of random people and them assigning them to teams, kind of trying to break these barriers that we create naturally around these things. I think it's extremely important figuring out what's the identity that the person builds so that you don't kind of go in different directions. And another thing that it's a little bit of a learning from hypergrowth or even from large organization. Maybe it's not growing so much, but my previous job before Ultrapay, I was the CTO for 1,500 people, 1,500 engineers organization. So there's things that work, there's things that don't work at that scale. And one of the things that don't work very well is that you cannot have one-on-one conversations about everything. You just forget about it. It doesn't scale. You have your one-on-ones about people development and all these kind of different subjects, but you cannot rely on one-on-one or even small groups communication to pass down a message for you as a leader. So what are the values that you're codifying that people know, that people apply? At SoundCloud specifically, I think we did a great job around identifying what are the things that are important to us as engineers. And that became something that people would use all the time. It's not just, values up a wall somewhere that nobody cares about. We would use them constantly around decisions. And they were very practical. I remember the first one was nothing's more important than playback. Because, it's part of the product. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can break everything. Just don't break the play button. And this became something that's really intrinsic, really important, and a shared value across different people. We start building this culture. So I think there's like this day-to-day kind of things that are mapped by culture, and obviously how you kind of cascade down goals. If you use kind of some framework like OKRs or not, it's not so relevant. What's relevant to me is how do you make sure that all the goals are aligned in an organization? And as a counterpoint of something that I've seen that doesn't work in my experience, and I think we're seeing the consequence of it now in the industry, is that a lot of the more modern approaches to even performance review and evaluation really think of the person as an individual. Like I had friends who got in trouble as an engineer because they were spending too much time helping the team instead of working on their own projects. So I think this is, unfortunately, this culture that comes from large organizations has been adopted by some smaller organizations. And this is the kind of scenario that creates a culture that's not going to fly because, people are going on different directions. So more recently in my career, this is kind of a feature, a bug, I guess a bug that I've been trying to fight within these kind of organizations.
You had a very good point about Facebook, I think, in the sense that they are kind of trying to onboard people to get to know within the group each other and then go to different teams. Their analogies that I'm thinking about is the corporate world where you have to go to different people to resolve the problem. And if you don't know them, it's hard to break their inter-department, inter-team boundary to make sure that you know right people so that they are happy to talk to you. And they're kind of in the enterprise, if you work for 5, 7, 10, 15 years, you start to grow with the company and know lots of people. Then it helps you to connect to those people and that guy worked on that small feature and they're on that tool so that I can connect to him or her and resolve my issue. Or what I'm doing right now in the city, because I work for the city, I'm using their authority in the sense I am saying that I advisor to CDTO, and by using the authority I break the ice to start conversation with the people so that they think, oh, this is a guy very important, so I have to talk to him, and then I basically gather information to build the process, resolve the issue, and connect people within different parts of the organization.
Yeah.
Because when you come with that title, say, oh, well, okay, this is an important guy. Absolutely. I have to talk to him to respect him.
Yeah. One thing interesting that we've done through SoundCloud was, well, there's two interesting things. One that I tried and failed was that I made it that anybody onboarding would onboard on the platform team. Even it doesn't matter what your background, because it's so easy that the kind of product team hates the platform team and vice versa. I want them to build empathy from day zero. It's like, this is what these people do. This is what, the kind of problems they have to deal with. So you understand. And also, who to talk to. You make like colleagues and friends and collaborators that who to reach out. So that was, I still like this idea and I want to get back to it at some point in my career. But the main struggle we had was I was very disruptive for the platform team because they were very small. And somebody who's a JavaScript background or iOS background was kind of alone. He wasn't well set up for success. So I stopped doing that after a while, but I still love this idea. I want to get back to it. And another thing that's a little related to what you're saying, but it's more on the technical side, on the system side, is that so SoundCloud is a well-documented success story around microservices expansion, going from legacy monolithic application to microservices. But we still had, and I guess they still have, the monolithic app running similar to what happened to Twitter back in the day. And it was back in 2013, 2012, it was really important. There was a lot of things that were, you had to understand how that works if you want to get anything serious done in this company. And I've noticed looking at just like, going through GitHub and things like that there was a pattern where if somebody didn't do a deploy of the main legacy code base within the first month in the company, they would never deploy that. They were just like not, they grow afraid of that. They would like, oh, when I'm in my first week, it's okay to ask stupid questions about this Capistrano thing. But I've been here for 3 months. I don't want to ask that kind of question. I should know. And then, just like create this situation where you had fewer and fewer people who understand the fundamental piece of technology. So one thing we kept doing, even with the kind of onboarding, actually was done in the first week. I did two things that I thought was interesting. One was within this first week, there was like different workshops and, the kind of stuff people usually go through. But as part of these workshops, you had to, deploy the system, like the monolith we had, the Rails code base. And another one is that you had to have our iOS and Android application running on your machine. We didn't have to do anything with it. Actually, I think the exercise was that you had to change a string somewhere just from A to B and see it on your screen. That was another attempt at
did you put any Easter eggs for the newbies
inside the app? Yeah. No, but that's an interesting idea. No, we just did really, I mean, going back to also how we looked at our data and our pull requests and things like this, we saw that there was such a big barrier between people building the API and people building the front end. This is the mobile first era. We were like one of the first mobile first companies. So mobile was the most important UI, and these people didn't even understand how to test. You're building an API endpoint. You don't know how that's going to look like. You have no idea. And it was there, like they had access to the code, but they didn't know how to run the simulator. They didn't have Xcode, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. So we tried to break these barriers as much as possible the first week the person had. And, maybe they'll never touch that again. It happens. But I wanted to make sure that they knew that it was possible. They knew who to talk to, who to ask questions if they wanted to try this in the future. So that was like all these different attempts at making sure people kind of connected. It was, I have to say, as much as we're all remote now, or some of us are going back to the office and things like this, this works much better obviously when everybody's in the office. We had this beautiful office in Berlin that I think they still have. But another thing that we've done at DigitalOcean, where back in 2016 the company was already 55% remote, was that we would bring the person who was joining and the manager, maybe a teammate, to the office so that they had a similar experience over the time. And also, in the office, there's 50% of the companies in the office. You get to meet people. But my general recommendation is that all these things are done in person. If the company can afford the company can do it, because this is extremely important. And then, can work remote after and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think this kind of onboarding is hard within their asynchronous communication, because basically you were as a new person, well, there are tons of documentation, tons of systems, and you have to start them and kind of get the grip, get the understanding, and then you, depending on the person, of course, but you might dive in the documentation and sit there for a few days before you start doing. And within their interaction, you support the person kind of and encourage him or her to go to try something out. And also you make sure the person is not stuck at one point in time, right? Because this happens here and there when something is not working, whether with your local machine or whether with a logic that you have to try out. So it's a very nice thing to try out together in the offline world where you can communicate. Well, interesting. So basically what you were doing in SoundCloud, you were bringing people through their common ground, so to say, establishing this common ground and then letting them go in the direction where they were originally hired, kind of.
Yes. Yes. Then they meet the team and they go through the team onboarding. Again, it's a little expensive a process, depending on how much you need to, what kind of is happening in the company. You might not be able to afford that time, but if you can afford it, I think it's great. And I think that's this is also, it's the kind of stuff I also learned, to be honest, from ThoughtWorks, because they had a very good onboarding process their way. That at ThoughtWorks we would be consultants and be in a project, and the client would come and it's like, oh wow, the reason I love working with ThoughtWorks or hiring ThoughtWorks as a vendor is because you guys always, you never bring random people. You always bring people who have worked together. And we never worked. I never saw this person before, yesterday when the project started. It's just they were able to create a culture that was so cohesive that we just, you can reassemble a team very quickly, which was great for their business back then. And I always took that as an inspiration in building, especially onboarding processes.
Wow, nice. I didn't know that about ThoughtWorks. Interesting. So basically, but it's not. It might be expensive, as you say, but it's an investment, right?
Yeah.
That you're making to bring the person up to speed and to adapt this person within their single culture of the company,
Yeah.
right? And this is an investment, therefore it costs you, I guess, less than bring the person, understand that this person doesn't fit, and
Yeah.
it's or moving the wrong direction. So therefore, I would say it's expensive, but it's worth doing.
Yeah, and one last point on this, because it's a very long topic, but I think this works best if you have kind of a centralized funnel for recruiting, and the kind of the office of the CTO or VP or whatever takes care of that part. Because if you delegate that to a team manager, it's too conflicting, right? The team manager really needs this person to be productive today. They're already behind, and they can't afford to say, "Oh, it's so and so is still onboarding." So it's the incentives are not there. If you can make that as kind of an institutional process that just happens, I think it works much better.
Yeah, indeed. Otherwise, every EM is kind of saying, "Well, I need this person here now.
Yep.
We need this person working on something, not adapt." Well, but it's also, as you say, depends on the company culture, right?
Yeah.
Because there you can basically explain that the culture first. You have to bring this person on board rather than just a robot who goes there and sits and writes the code. It's not. It doesn't work with people. So just treat people with care, dear guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, when we were discussing, you mentioned there different positions, and as far as I understand, you were in different positions. You were CTO, you were architect, you were EM, you were director. I've heard a nice joke about architect is a person who spends 40 hours a week in a system design interview, and sometimes has to go to the meetings. So is it true from your perspective?
For the architect role, yes, absolutely. There's one I don't hire architects. I don't like to work with them in particular. My resume, there's just this small thing. It says that I'm an architect because when I'm an immigrant to the US, and when somebody had to fill in my visa information, they fill in architect because that was going to sound better for USCIS. The company had 8 people. Everybody wrote code, even the CEO. Like there was no architects. Okay. But because of the O1 visa process, there's you need to prove that you had hiring people at this and this particular position. So they hired me as an architect, and they did all the paperwork correctly that way. So that's why I ended up with this title. But usually, I believe architecture is something that's it's always happening at all times. You might have some people who are more experts in one area or another or whatever it is. And there's things that you can do on the technical side to make things better or worse. But I don't believe in the role of an architect person who sits and defines what's happening all over, especially if this person is not actually writing code. Then it doesn't matter how much experience you have. Look, I have 20 plus experience in writing software. I don't think anybody, even with 20 years experience, is qualified to be just drawing little diagrams and sending from the heavens to the team so that they can build whatever big vision I might have.
So basically, then we don't review the architect role, and what I'm curious is to understand the difference between director and their CTO role. As you said, you were CTO at one point in time, and what is the difference? Where does it stand? Is it their growth path, or is it step to the side?
So it's my most honest opinion around all this is that after first line manager, titles are whatever the person wants to have in that company. Especially if you see companies that have head of this and head of that, that means that they have no idea what this person should be doing. So usually I can tell you I've had 3 different director roles. They're all very different. At SoundCloud, the CTO of SoundCloud, Eric, was one of the founders, and he's not a technical person at all. He was not involved in engineering at all. But when they built the company, decided one was going to be CEO, the other one's going to be CTO, and they built the first Rails app that eventually became the company. So it was kind of a weird situation where he had the title just because they needed one title and didn't want to create. Back then, chief product officer wasn't that common. Eric was a de facto chief product officer, not engineering. So SoundCloud was kind of all over the place. I guess it would be more equivalent to being a VP in kind of a more normal situation. But I think the biggest difference is not so much on the title, but is like how the reporting structure works. Both ways, upward and downward. The one is if you're working directly with the team or with people who are on the trenches, like writing code, it's a different role from when you're managing managers. I mean, obviously, it's like even layers you can go. Managing managers can be extremely frustrating and also can be very powerful without you realizing. One little word you say gets amplified in weird ways. Yeah. But so there's like it's more important, more than the title is important, how close you are to people doing the work, but also it's important how close you are to people making the decisions. So you need to pay attention to these both sides when you're talking to somebody about a job, especially if it's a smaller company. These are two questions that I think are super interesting for you to understand before making a call. It's like how close I am to people doing the work, how close I am to people making the decisions. You might have, directors reporting to you with managers, senior managers, like a whole tree under you. But if you're not close to a decision made, you just like pass through layer. There's only so much you can do. And there's also how much accountability and ownership you have. If you don't have a budget, if you cannot make decisions, you just again, you might be just a senior manager put in that position, even if your title is VP or whatever it is. These are all kind of, really depends on the company. But one thing I've learned, especially when talking to people about new opportunities, is try to map where I am in the company. If I'm in a small startup, am I responding to the CEO? Is there a CTO coming? Because that makes a whole difference. And also, it has happened to me that I come to a job and it turns out that I had 4 new managers that I never saw before, never talked to, and now reporting to me. And also, by the way, they never heard about me before. It's like one day on Monday morning, they're like, oh, this is a new boss. It's like, okay, who? What? We were hiring a new boss? So this kind of, I guess, like understanding the topology that way, to me, is much more important than the types. Okay, but I'll make actually one caveat about this. It is for practical purposes, 100%, I would spend much more time thinking about this, but don't be fooled, as I've been in my career, thinking that titles don't matter. I have not been able to be considered for opportunities because I never had a VP title. And now I had a CTO and director title. And that's literally as ridiculous as it is. It's just like, it makes no sense, but we need to play the game that we're given. There's only so much control we have over these things. So my main recommendation to everybody I work with, do pay attention to your title. Don't be obsessed about this. Obviously, there's only so much value these things bring to you. But don't, I'm going to give you a raise and I'm going to become a senior engineer forever for 10 years. This is going to look weird. People might not even, if somebody asks you a question, they might understand, oh yeah, that's because of this and this and this situation. But oftentimes they won't even ask the question. They're just going to screen the resumes or whatever. It's like, oh no, this person's like, what's happening here? They're never promoted.
Yeah, you basically have to show the changes that you made in one company. So basically you came there as an engineer or as an EM, and then you were doing some stuff that resulted in some result. And the result has been appreciated in the sense that you were moving on or in that company, moving up in the hierarchy with a different title that people might not know or might not understand because, well, as you really said, and the tech, every company runs a title scheme differently, or you just basically move to a different company. But it brings me to our next question. I noticed that you were in some companies, in the last companies, you were staying up to 2 years, right? So is it because of you wanted to grow to a different domain, or let's talk about this, because we discussed this a little bit before the show, right? And this might be understood in different ways. First, when you're being screened, people say, okay, well, he's not being consistent, and he basically goes there, jumps on a different company because he wants a salary raise, or he's not being productive and he's being fired. You never know from their CV or from the resume, right? I'm not saying this is your
no,
case.
Absolutely.
Just sharing the thoughts that you see.
So there's a few different things that, and I think more important than my resume is what I've learned so that people can take from this. When I moved from Berlin to the US, the main reason was that I wanted to be more adventurous in my career. I had spent 5 years at ThoughtWorks, 3 years at the prior 5 years at SoundCloud. And I was looking at, all my friends who are in bigger markets. Berlin was a growing market, and it's a big market now. But I mean, the US is obviously much bigger than all other markets. So it's like I want to try different things. And I was like 31, I think. So it was like it's now or never. This is the time I'm going to go and try different things. So coming for DigitalOcean was a big leap of faith. Like I had no idea. I'd never used DigitalOcean before. So it's like, okay, let's try it to see how it works here. And from there, I left DigitalOcean to join the 8 people startup I was talking about. Had a great time. Everybody was in San Francisco. I was the only person in New York. It's like 8 hours difference. Might as well be a different country. I didn't want to move to San Francisco. Went to WeWork. We all know what happened to WeWork. It was unfortunately, it was. I did think I was going to spend more time there because I really love the product. It's just like the situation there. There's books published about this, and more recently, SeatGeek was an interesting one. SeatGeek was a company that I'm really bullish on. Like I love that. So for those who are not in the US, SeatGeek has a little bit of presence in Europe, but not as big as here. SeatGeek is basically the competitor to Ticketmaster. It's the only real competitor to Ticketmaster. Mm-hmm. And I was hired there to kind of work on going from a secondary marketplace for tickets to being an actual competitor to Ticketmaster. And I spent all the kind of high years of COVID there, which in live events, you can imagine that my job changed a lot. It was like, we were selling out the Dallas Cowboys stadiums in 5 minutes in Feb 2020. And the next week, our revenue dropped to zero, and it was like zero for a year. So it was an interesting kind of, I don't know if it was the right word, but everybody went through a lot during COVID. But my job changed a lot to being like, how can I keep this company? How can I keep money in the business? Cash in the business. I was renegotiating contracts. My job changed drastically. Ended up getting back to a better point, but it caused a lot of burnout. It's like, okay, I need a break, and that's kind of what the situation there. The only interesting thing about everything I said so far is that going back to the conversation about titles, if I have this conversation with you, I can tell you about like every single position. Oh, this happened, and then this, and I can give you references if you would be like, oh, can I talk to somebody? It's like, yeah, sure, talk to my previous boss. Like, I know they love me. That I don't have a problem with this. But one reason that I don't recommend doing what I've done is that this is kind of step 2 already that we're having this conversation. Step 1 is you look at my LinkedIn or my resume, and then you immediately make your own conclusions.
Exactly. So you don't start talking. You basically start looking on their resume on LinkedIn, and then what I noticed, and well, this is how I came your profile, and the person he posts about the things about their and he talks on different conferences, so he's an interesting person to talk to, right? So this might be something that their recruiter will not do.
Absolutely. It's just I have this enormous privilege that I am a person who likes to write and have been able to give talks and, talk a lot about the work that we've done in a way that was relevant to people. And that, highlights my profile and creates opportunities for me. If I didn't have this kind of more public presence side in the industry, my life would be much harder with the resume I have right now. Again, I can get you to talk to people who work with me, who are my boss, who is like, and I know because I've been through that, what kind of things they would say. But to get to this point, it's not too different to online dating, right? It's like you have 5 seconds to make a decision about this person. Yes, no, whatever it is. And it's not something I recommend. But at the same time, I think that one thing that I should have done a better job in terms of finding good opportunities one way or another is actually not just looking at the opportunity as a whole. WeWork was a case like this. WeWork was like, this company is growing like crazy. Oh my God, I want to be part of this. I'm going to jump in. I was working at meetup.com, which was a WeWork acquisition. And it was fun. There was a lot of interesting things about my time at WeWork one way or another, but it wasn't the right company for me. It was not the time that I wanted to be, the right time. I wanted to be much more influential in a company, and WeWork had 10,000 employees. So, finding the right size, I think, is important so that you don't actually end up in a situation like I've been, too experimental, if you will. Maybe it's okay in your first years of your career. It gets less so, especially as you get to more leadership positions.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And basically, you mentioned your interesting case that with the ticket selling in the COVID area. So you had in the last few years quite stressful setup with the industry being hit hard, and now after the COVID times. So I would say we all hear the news in the recent days about lots of people being fired, right, from the tech, and you're running your own company. So you basically adding. Did you had enough rest from the stress so that you decided to go for another one, like adrenaline shot, or so why did you decide to go for your startup?
So it's interesting because the first time I tried starting my own company was when I left SeatGeek. This is 2021. And I was, I took 3 months. I went to the Jersey Shore here. I was on the beach. It's like, I don't want to think about work. I need a break. But then I mean, like, okay, what I want to do next, I don't want to have another job that looks exactly the same as this job. I want to try, and I have these ideas around tools to help engineering leaders, things that I wish somebody had built for me. Maybe I'll go for it. And because it was 2021, I had like half a slide deck and half an idea, and people just throwing money because, back 21 was VC market was crazy. Mm-hmm. But I decided not to proceed with this idea because basically it's funny because it's a technology problem. I'm a application developer, backend platform, whatever. I'm very comfortable with all this. But I figured out that to do the kind of stuff that I needed to do to help engineering leaders, I had to understand context of conversations. And that means, natural language processing, machine learning, a lot of things that I have no background on. I was like, oh, okay. I hit a wall. I was like, I don't think I can proceed with this. At the same time, I had a very good offer to work for a company in Brazil, like from New York to Brazil. And it was just like a great opportunity. It's like, okay, I will stay in this company. I'll help them do. The main goal they had was that they want to go for an IPO. They wanted to prepare their house for the IPO. So that was my last role as a CTO when I was working there. So I took this time off. The company decided that everybody needs to be, going back to our conversation about jumping, like the company decided everybody needs to be in the office in São Paulo. Mm-hmm. And I live like Brooklyn, New York. I was like, yeah, sounds like a long commute. This is not going to happen. So we parted ways. And that's when I decided I had to think again. Like, am I going to find another job? What's going to happen? Honestly, I talked to a lot of companies. This is last year, February. And a lot of what I've seen in the industry, being very frank, was people in small to medium-sized companies who had a lot of money that they got in 2021 from VC, did not have an idea, did not have good product market fit. They're kind of burning through money. And it got to like weird situations where more than once, either directly or between the lines, the CEO was talking to basically told me, oh yeah, what I need you to do is to come in, fire the whole engineering team, hire everybody, like new people, so
that
we can
just grab the money and put them people on work, and they want to get the revenue. That's it. The
problem is clearly the engineering team. It's not my product. It's not my design. It's the engineering team, and I used to this. And I just felt like going back to the conversation about short tenure. I was like, I don't want to go into a company and they're going to run out of money in 1 year, or I'm not going to be happy with this word. So I had some opportunity to just sit down and think about this. And that's about the time, all these kind of different AI conversations were happening. And whatever you might think about AI tools and the way that they play in this new world, one thing that's interesting is that they really help you understand context in a structured way. So you can paste a document and you can say, spit out a JSON with this and this and this information. And, there's different things you need to do. It's not magic, but it's much better than me trying to get a master's in machine learning just so that I can build a startup. So that I saw this as a great opportunity. At the same time, my co-founder, who is also my best friend for 20 years now, he was at Microsoft Research, then at Meta, working on the PyTorch team. He wanted to leave Meta and kind of start his own thing. So we got together and we get the band back together and started working on this idea. And it's been wild. It's very interesting to be working on a two-people startup. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of selling, much more than I'm actually doing anything else. But that's how we ended up here.
this conversation is a good platform to share what you're doing in more details. I'm curious to hear about your product, because people who are listening are basically your direct customers, like EMs or leaders who might be using it. So what is it? What you're building, like a context analysis tool for the managers, or what is it?
So I think the best way to think about it as a vision is that the same way that, when I started writing code, usually we use maybe Macs, more often like Notepad on Windows or something like this, and then you have like VS Code, IntelliJ, all the different IDEs now. Right. One thing that it's always been very frustrating to me is that as a leader, all we have is a bunch of spreadsheets and articles and things that you collect over a job. I think every leader I know has a Google Drive somewhere with all the different processes and templates that they've used in previous jobs and they like to apply again. So my idea was like, how can I get these kind of tools we use and make it closer to the experience that an engineer has when writing code or deploying something to AWS or something like that. And like I was saying before, a lot of it has to do with context, because, you're mentioning something you said before about how people onboard on companies is that I might be team A, you're team B, and we report to such and such managers. And I can get this information from something like Workday. It has all the org chart there for you. But that's not how people work. I need to know that Alice from team A actually has a very good relationship with Bob on that other team. And that's how work actually gets done in the company. So basically, we analyze all this different information. We create this big graph with different relationships and things that happen at the company. From there, we apply, this is where AI helps us to build this graph from the context. From there on, we actually use just more classic machine learning techniques to filter down things like, there's this document that was shared on this channel and you'll be interested, but either you didn't see it or not in the channel, or, it's hard for anybody even to think that you'd be interested because it's not even related to your team, but I know that it's kind of stuff that you care about. So that's the kind of feature fundamental we want to focus on for this first release. We're focusing on what we call attention management. So bringing to information that you need at the time you need. We do that on Slack. We're now working on a Google Chrome extension that's going to do various interesting things that way. But the idea is that we are going to basically build an agent platform that can run a lot of your process for you. From maybe a stand-up to recurring meetings, performance reviews, whatever it is. We have a few interesting ideas. One big thing that I wrote an article about how we did RFCs at different companies a while ago. And this article is like well referenced and people like the process. So I'd like one of our next releases is to have this basically be automated by the tool. It's super interesting because, it's novel. I don't know anything that tries to do that. I've literally have sat down with people who approach me when I was at different jobs and say, hey, I'm going to Y Combinator and I'm working on the engineering space. And I sat down with them for hours and explained to them how every spreadsheet I had worked and what my day-to-day looks like. And unfortunately, they kind of would never end up building this product. They end up building something around code metrics or something like that. So I want basically to build a tool that I wish somebody had built for me.
So basically, as far as I understand, what you're doing is it's multi-directional. First is to get this relational information, connection information, their context information in a tool so that it can help you to navigate their complexity of org structure and the product that you're building to kind of connect to right people and to push back you the information that you might be interested in. This is the first part. And second part is basically when you're running the team, the company, you have all the different process, like helping you with a setup, with a process setup, like with a, one-to-one meeting, with a sprint review, and so on and so forth. Does it help you to resolve the conflict? So you see like a chat in Slack where people start to argue about the thing. Does your tool help you to understand and resolve it? How does it work then?
This is the funny thing, because when I talk to somebody like you who not only has this job but also talks to a lot of people, you're like, oh shit, yes. What about this? When you're talking to somebody who has never played the role of leader in an organization, they scratch their head like, but why is this a problem? It's like it's so funny. But yes. So you talk about Slack. It's funny. I was talking to a user yesterday, this big prop tech real estate company, and the case they had that we were going through using the tools that this person wrote an RFC, and they decided that they're going to discuss the RFC on a Slack channel. And ultimately, the CEO came to this person and said, "Hey, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is a mess. This conversation going nowhere." And we looked at the conversation and we saw that people were talking about 35 different topics. There was some contention points here, contention points there. And this person, as a leader of a 50 people organization, was like, shit, where do I even start? Like, what's going on here? And, it's a kind of situation that will be brought to your attention as soon as possible. One of the kind of biggest one for me are comments on documents, when people are just going over and over and over in comments, and maybe the discussion is not moving, and pull requests. That pull request is never merged because people are arguing where the semicolon should go, kind of thing.
Okay.
So that's the kind of information that we are bringing to people that way. And because our AI system understands software projects, it's biased in a way that it knows what a pull request is. So it's not like a more generic approach. So bringing this information is step one, finding out these things. Step two, which is kind of the hard part of what we're trying to do, is how can I help you solve this conflict? How can I help you smooth out this process, run this process for you? That's obviously more still discovery phase one way or another. We focus on the first part so we can get a product out. But that's the spirit of it.
Just curious about another thing is, when you work with a person or with a team, every person has this recurring behavior, right? And this recurring behavior is something that you might want to understand clearly and understand their hard skills of the person and hard points and where this person fails to support this person, right? To make sure that you see that this person is always coming with the same stupid kind of question. Well, there are no stupid questions, but with the same. So understand the recurring pattern of the behavior based on the interaction, and then either help this person understand that this kind of behavior is not something that you would like to tolerate within the company, and that goes against their company policy and the company spirit, and you would like to show look, John, this 3 times you are doing the same. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss why you're doing this. But then you, as a manager, will have a knowledge base, and you have a good reference, because every good conversation is driven by the data, by examples, right? You said okay, here you had a conversation with Alice, here a conversation with Bob, and you were showing the same pattern that is not welcome in our team, right? And if you want to change, let's talk about this. Why are you doing this? I would like to help you. Otherwise, we will just have to say goodbye and depart, right? Is there something that's on your list? Because this will be extremely helpful for a lot of people. Because when you're coming to a person, show me the example, right? And if you are experienced manager, you can spot those things and note them down. But if you're just starting, it's basically very hard thing to learn.
Yeah, well, I think there's 2 principles that we kind of want to follow. The first one is that we want to be like a co-pilot in the good sense of the word. We want to help you, but because especially you're dealing with people, and these machines are imprecise. So what if I tell you something that's not actually true because the machine freaked out and hallucinated one way or another? So we always want to make sure that, as much as we try to ground everything, and that's where the kind of more traditional machine learning comes in, we want to bring information to the person and make it easy for you to make a decision, but not make a decision for you. This is not what we want to do. And on that side of things, what we don't want to do is to become like a performance review software, this kind of stuff. There's a lot of those in the market. Some work better than others, but the thing they don't do is that they don't particularly help you kind of get this context from different areas. I was working a few positions ago. I remember I was working with this super senior engineer on the infrastructure team. Very kind of traditional kind of archetype where the person was more risky than they should be. And it wasn't a cultural thing because everybody had the same kind of background, cultures like that. This person was just a little prickly more than the usual person. And like a lot of people do in this situation, what I did was, you had a conversation here and there, but you start collecting things on a Google Doc somewhere so you can bring to them and not be talking in abstract terms. This case exactly went well. This person, it got to a point where this person was helpful that I brought this to them. I mean, it took a while, but to a point that they would always kind of, hey, do you have a minute to double check this document or this message I want to send? Because I don't want to people not to like me. Basically, it's like a similar thing. And this is the kind of tool that we want to build to help people go there. What we want to get to the end of the year, a big roadmap, is that you should be able to have a lot of this kind of stuff you need to write a performance review coming from our tool. It's still interesting how we're going to do this UI wise and all that. We don't want to manage the process of performance review. Again, you use whatever tool your company uses, but I would like very much that people can just get a lot of this information, factual kind of links and things like this, instead of spending, like as we do right now, every company spends 1 month every quarter just trying to figure out how to do performance review.
No, it's not about the managing the performance review, but rather giving their data points that you can use, right? And then how you use them, this is up to you as far as send your tool. But basically saying, look, John is instead of pings colleagues every time he has a task of type X, right? So pay the attention to this, and then as a manager say, okay, well, should I? Why does he do this? Does he isn't he confident enough? Does he need some help, or is he just being lazy and tries to delegate this task? And if he's just being lazy, what do I do with that? Do I make sure this kind of task is not assigned and I use John's skills in some other way, or do I make sure everyone in the team in the same direction and is equal, right? And I push him to from such type. So it's like a tool, and as a manager, you need to then analyze this information in your setup.
Yeah, and something that we like to think is that so more than just the productivity of the manager, we are like a scalability tool. Because when you're in this situation you said right now, this happened to me so many times in my life, where this person is asking too many questions or whatever it is. When you go back to the beginning of this conversation, when you talk about hypergrowth or even just growth, you're like, okay, I'm hiring 10 people next year. Am I going to hire more Johns? Am I like, what's my perspective? Should I optimize for this case and try to figure out what's it? It's like staffing strategy comes from that. Yeah, that's the kind of, this is what you need to scale a company without honestly doing what we've done. And now we have all the layoffs everywhere. Like, let's just hire 100 people and, whoever out of 130 is going to work. And the other ones, we find different roles for them.
So I'm convinced. Tell us where we can, or we put in their description below, or how people can go and try your tool.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a beta right now that works only on Slack, but we are releasing the Google Chrome support kind of in the next week or so.
Excited to check it out. And dear listeners, just go ahead and try it out. We'll put the links below, and this tool might really help you to work with people as it sounds. So tell it out, trust, test it, and let us know how it works. I'll be interested to read the comments from you. Just switching to a different topic, we're talking about managers, managing, and we are mixing with the creation. And I've seen your Twitter post or X post, to say correctly, a few days ago about your GitHub commits. So you're not managing, but writing more code in the last lately. What is closer to you, managing people, managing teams, or writing code?
So I like to think that I like to solve systems problems, and sometimes these systems are code, sometimes the systems are people, sometimes it's organization. I tell you this to everybody I work with, and they can like literally attest to this. Like, I am not going to be the best people manager you've had. Definitely not, because honestly, there's only so many times in my life I had a good people manager. So even like my examples come from talks, from listening to podcasts, and to like reading books. I haven't really experienced that, especially in the beginning of my career. But I like to think of, how the delivery machine works and what are the things that we need and don't need to do to good there. Managing people is something that I always had to, I thought about. It came to me in my career as I wanted more scope, more responsibility, more control. Over the last 5 years, basically, that's all I've done. While managing departments and teams and things like that, people being part of it. I think it's an important part of it, but it's definitely not the job. I always say that if I want somebody just to be a coach of somebody, I would hire somebody who's a coach, who went to school for 4 years to do that. Not somebody trying to do it. But the technology side is always, it's my hobby, and I am lucky that I've been able to always keep myself very technical, very connected to what was happening. I jumped from managing 300 people on DigitalOcean to a startup where I was literally committing code to the Kubernetes core, and that was good that I was able to catch up quickly and all this kind of stuff and keep myself kind of fresh. I love writing code. It's great. It's sitting down in this office and just like putting headphones and not talking to people for the whole afternoon. It's a bliss. But there's the interesting thing that everybody gets to at some point where you understand it doesn't matter how good your code is, like how fast you type, how productive you are. There's only so much you can do in yourself on your own. And that's where the whole kind of different dynamics start. And it's funny because I am writing like a lot of code right now, much more than in the last 7 years, but that doesn't mean that management doesn't kick in, right? So for example, right now it's my co-founder, Rodrigo, myself, and we have one person, two people working on contracts for us, like one more like front-end engineer and a designer. And yesterday I was really frustrated because I kind of did not know what was going on. And everybody's in remote locations, so they're in the same office, but he was away yesterday. And it was like, okay, I need to, I hate to be that guy, but I need to open my toolbox and pull up a tool. Like we have a stand up in the morning, but it was just like that. Oh, I did this yesterday. It's like, no, again, I spent 5 years at ThoughtWorks. I know how to run a stand up. Let's get a board up. And I want, let's talk about the work. I don't care what you've done yesterday. I care like, what do you need in terms of help, support, whatever, so that this card can go from here to done? Like, how can we reduce work in progress? How can we do all these things? This is my management side kind of immediately kicking in, even though we only have 4 people. But that's kind of, I would say this is how I ended up with the management position at SoundCloud, because it was the exact same situation with 8 people. It's like, no, this is insane. We need to have some order here because this is going crazy. So, it happens both ways.
As an experienced engineering manager, as you're saying, you're still Phil while writing code that it comes to you and you're trying to support people and to guide. As a closing note, what would be like their, let's say one and the most important skill for their engineering manager from your point of view?
For engineering manager? So I think that the hardest skill is people management. But at the same time, I think it's the easiest to acquire because over the last 5 years, we've been, talking so much about everything from how to have one-on-ones, how to help somebody progress in their career and all that. There's like so much that you can consume. That's actually not that hard to get better at it. Maybe not get great, but get better at it. The hardest part to me, like in practice, becomes managing delivery and managing projects, because I think we completely lost this as an industry. We went from very rigid kind of Scrum and Kanban and whatever else to basically nothing now. It's just like I send you a doc and you do it and we talk about it once in a while and that's it. So figuring out how a delivery machine works and what are the problems, what are the bottlenecks is extremely important. And I think it's definitely not something people are paying attention to these days. One example I use a lot around this is, I mentioned that at SoundCloud, we had this whole kind of going to microservices thing that was reasonably famous back in the day. But I wrote an article in 2015 called How We Ended Up with Microservices, where I think it only talks about technology in the last few paragraphs, because the whole reason we ended up with microservices was because of trying to apply lean principles and looking at our lead time and see that our bottlenecks were here, here, and there. So if we change the technology here, here, and there, we're gonna not have these bottlenecks anymore and get more productive. So this is the kind of understanding the machine and then figuring out what kind of changes you need to make to make this machine more efficient. It's hard because a lot of it comes from experience, and I don't think we even have good ways to learn it these days, because a lot of people are just throwing more people at the problem. It's a while ago, but when I joined DigitalOcean, I sat down with the CEO, and the first conversation we ever had was, he told me, look, as long as I'm concerned, your job here is to hire 100 people to the end of the year. It's like, okay, but what is people going to, just we created this culture of throwing more people into the problem. And I think this is kind of becoming harder and harder for a manager to get good at.
Got it. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you and spending this hour. A very interesting conversation. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if people want to reach out to you, where do they find what is the best way to connect with you?
So I'm Phil Calçado everywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads, Instagram, whatever you want me, I'm there. And I'm very happy to just like interact on LinkedIn is not the place where I look at more messages, but between Twitter and just email as well, I'm happy. Phil@ultrap.ai. Happy to have a chat. And again, like y'all like watching this video are part of my ideal customer profile. So not only I would love to exchange ideas, but also it's extremely important for my job that I learned from y'all.
Great. So thank you very much. And dear listeners, if you like the video, go like and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, go like it and describe us in the comments. Say us, what didn't you like, so that we can improve and make the show even better.
Thank you.